Hi, everyone. It's now 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and you have joined Better Together, the Power of Mothers and Families to Improve Reentry Outcomes webinar. To allow for additional sign-ins past the hour, we will get started in about 1 minute. Thanks for joining. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining today's webinar called Better Together, the Power of Mothers and Families to Improve Reentry Outcomes. My name is Felicia Lopez-Wright, and I am a project manager at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and I will be facilitating today's webinar in partnership with the Center for Children and Family Futures. Next slide, please. To give you an outline of the webinar, first I will do a brief overview of the CSG Justice Center and an introduction of our speakers, and then we will learn about what the data says about mothers who experience incarceration and how it impacts their family and children. After that, we'll cover the common barriers to reentry, and finally, we'll hear about actionable strategies to actively integrate the input and perspective of family members. We'll also have time for Q&A before wrapping up. So anytime during the webinar, you can ask a question by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and entering your question. We do not have an open chat, so that is the only way to ask a question. This includes just content-related questions. We will try to reply to some questions as we go, but for some of them, we will actually answer them live during the Q&A. We're not, unfortunately, able to solve any technical issues for you. Please refer to the Zoom guidance on their website if you are encountering any technical issues. We do apologize for that, but we are recording today's webinar and we are going to post it on our website within 1 to 2 weeks along with the PowerPoint. Next slide, please. The Council of State Governments Justice Center is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that combines the power of a membership association representing state officials in all 3 branches of government with the expertise of a policy and research team focused on assisting others to attain measurable results. Our staff develops research-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. This slide describes a bit more about our work style and how we strive to reflect Justice Center core values, which includes a commitment to being independent and nonpartisan in every aspect of our work, providing rigorous, trusted, high-quality analysis, developing practical and innovative solutions informed by data and research, promoting collaboration and building consensus, and being inclusive and respectful of diverse views and experiences. Next. And here are the overarching goals that guide our work at the CSG Justice Center, which is breaking the cycle of incarceration, advancing health, opportunity, and equity, and using data to improve safety and justice. Next slide. The CSG Justice Center is committed to advancing racial equity internally and through our work with states, local governments, and tribal nations. We support efforts to dismantle racial inequities within the criminal and juvenile justice systems by providing rigorous and high-quality research and analysis to decision makers and helping stakeholders navigate the critical and at times uncomfortable issues the data reveal. We rely on stakeholder engagement and other measures to advance equity, provide guidance and technical assistance, and improve outcomes across all touchpoints in the justice, behavioral health, crisis response, and reentry systems. And we are very excited today to partner with the Center for Children and Family Futures, or CCFF, on this webinar. So joining us, we have Ariel Andrews, a program associate, Clarence James, a program associate, and Jane Pfeiffer, a program director. So just an overview of CCF. The Center for Children and Family Futures strives to prevent child abuse and neglect while improving safety, permanency, well-being, and recovery outcomes with equity for all. to all children, parents, and families affected by trauma, substance use, and mental health disorders. CCFF is a nonprofit organization with over 25 years of experience providing consultation, training and technical assistance, strategic planning, and evaluation services focused on improving practice and policy at the intersections of child welfare, substance use, and mental health disorder treatment and court systems. Among others, CCFF operates the National Family Treatment Court Training and Technical Assistance Program on behalf of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP, and National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare on behalf of the Administration of Children, Youth, and Families, Children's Bureau, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. And it is the home to the National Sobriety, Treatment, and Recovery Teams model. Thank you again to CCFF for your partnership on today's webinar. Next slide. So I'm now going to pass it over to Ariel from CCFF, who will review what the data says about mothers who experience incarceration and how this impacts their families. Ariel?
Great. Thank you so much, Felicia, and welcome everyone to the webinar today. My name is Ariel Andrews, and I am a program associate with the Center for Children and Family Futures. I've been with CCFF for a little over 3 years, actually coming up on my 4-year anniversary. And before that, I was a family treatment court coordinator in Grant County, Indiana. So Indiana is where I am from, where I live. I live on the east side of Indianapolis now. And I was also an adult probation officer. So I have a bit of that criminal justice experience and that context of serving families affected by substance use and involved in the criminal justice system. So Clarence, Jane, and myself, we are so excited to be with you all today to talk about how the power of family can really improve those reentry outcomes for mothers who are experiencing incarceration, and talking about how those effects or how we can improve those outcomes for their children and their family members. Next slide. So I get the pleasure of doing the deep dive into the data, so bear with me, and then Clarence is going to talk you through some common barriers, and then we're going to leave you off with some strategies with Jane. So the good is yet to come. But want to do the deep dive into the data. So starting off with over 50% of females in state or federal prison are mothers with minor children. And that number jumps to 80% for women who are in county jails being mothers. These percentages do not include women entering incarceration who are pregnant and preparing to become mothers while they're incarcerated. So it's really important to know this because most mothers who are experiencing incarceration are the primary caregiver for their children. So when the father is incarcerated, 90% of children remain and live with their mother. They remain with their mother. However, when a mother becomes incarcerated, only 25% of the children live with their father and 50% live with a grandparent. So what that really tells us is that we're seeing some significant family disruption when mothers become incarcerated. So you're going to hear some more from Jane later on about some strategies to provide that caregiver support, which is really an important component about family engagement and that family-centered approach. Next slide. Also want to take time to look at how substance use and mental health are affecting women who are incarcerated. So about half of incarcerated women in prisons meet the criteria for substance use disorder. So this isn't just had substance use involved in their arrest or have experienced or experimented with substance use, but they actually meet that criteria for a substance use disorder diagnosis. And it's estimated to be even higher in a jail setting. Additionally, you'll see that mental health problems are overrepresented in the female prison population. I'm not just talking about that serious mental illness like schizophrenia or psychotic disorders, although that's definitely included here, but I'm talking about depression and anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, personality disorders. I'm curious to know, are you experiencing these types of mental health diagnoses in the people you serve in your offices or in the settings where you're serving people? Are they having these co-occurring disorders of substance use and mental health? Another consistent factor for women who are incarcerated and have a mental health disorder is a history of trauma. I'm not sure if that would be surprising to most folks, but that history of trauma is extremely prevalent. And so we're seeing that 86% of women report having experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, and that 77% reported partner violence, and then 60% reported caregiver violence by either a parent or a guardian. So we're seeing this effect all the way from childhood, right? Somebody taking care of them as a child, experiencing violence there, partner violence, and then some sort of sexual violence. So a significant history of trauma, and we'll get more into that later on. So when we're focusing on supporting mothers in the reentry process, it's really important to consider and being able to manage these additional needs in the pre-planning and transition periods once moms are back into the community. Going to take some specific time and attention and some unique partnerships to be successful in those transition periods. When those needs go unmet, it's a really fast way for that reentry plan to be unsuccessful and for mom to reenter incarceration. So I'd encourage you to consider if mom is on medication-assisted treatment for substance use disorder, or maybe she's on psychiatric meds for her mental health, and she's reentering the community. Is she leaving her correctional facility with enough of her medication to get set up with her doctor in her own community? Is she connected with insurance? And does she have an identified pharmacy where she will get her medication refilled? Does she have money to get her medication refilled? And is she leaving the facility with refills? Right? These are some of the questions that we need to be asking and having some answers to. Who's helping her navigate this process? And so maybe this isn't your responsibility specifically, but maybe you don't know, or maybe you do know whose responsibility or whose role it is. So having these processes and logistics worked out before they are released can really help set them up for success, but that doesn't always take place in many jurisdictions. So being able to leave here today, maybe that's your next step, is going back to your community and asking the question, how do we support mom in her transition for that successful reentry into the community? Next slide. I want to take some time here to acknowledge the importance of data and disaggregating your data. This aligns well with what CSG highlighted today with their equity piece. And you're going to hear more from Clarence about this as well. So first, I just want to take some time to acknowledge not all of these are systems on this slide. So you see juvenile justice and then parental incarceration. That's not really a system. So it's really talking about parents who experience incarceration or the criminal justice system, and then the child welfare system. So this point's about being able to look at different data points, such as arrests or rearrests, system outcomes, maybe child welfare outcomes like out-of-home care, cross-systems outcomes, and not stopping there. We need to look further and ask the question, what does this outcome look like when it's broken out by age, for example? Is it different for those who are age 0 to 3 compared to those who are 0 to 5? Is it different based on the race or ethnicity of the mother? Or maybe it's different based on the mom having a prior child welfare case, or maybe she was involved in child welfare as a child herself. So it's really important to look at your own community and identify what are those needs? What are the strengths of your community, and what does that makeup look like? Where might there be disproportionality that's going to help inform those changes in policy and practice that can really make a difference here? So until you know how policy and practice really affects everyone, but also groups of individuals with similar characteristics, you really can't say your outcomes are as good as they are. So I'll give you an example. Parents who participate in a therapeutic parenting program have their children return to their care more quickly than parents who do not. It's a really great outcome, right? We want that to take place. Well, what if we break that out by education? College degree versus high school diploma or a GED. What we could find is that parents who had the parenting education program and a college degree had their children returned home more quickly, but maybe those with a high school diploma or GED either had the same rate, or maybe they had worse rates than those who didn't participate in that parenting program. That's going to cause us to ask more questions. What is happening that those with a lesser education aren't having the same outcomes as those with a higher education? That's why we need to disaggregate our data. Maybe the difference is between mothers and fathers. Maybe the difference is age groups, right? There's lots of different ways we need to be disaggregating our data. So really recognizing that it's not just enough to look at the data point, but really how it's affecting people and their families. Again, may not be your job. In a previous life, I was the coordinator and data, I was the collector of the data, but I wasn't the one doing the analysis, right? But who is looking at this data in a way that's understanding the greater or those lesser effects and the conditions to more fully meet those needs of the people that you're working with? And if you're not sure, maybe that's your next step following today's webinar, going back to your community and asking, how are we looking at our data and are we disaggregating it by the different subgroups? Next slide. All right, let's talk about these kiddos. So from the child's perspective, more than 2.7 million children in the United States have an incarcerated parent. I want you to think about the average school classroom, right? That's about 1 in 28 children. 28 children is a pretty big classroom, but 1 in 28 children. Of children with a parent who's incarcerated, approximately half of them are under the age of 10. That's about elementary age, maybe third grade. So half are under the age of a third grader. And then about 15 to 20% of children entering the child welfare system have a parent who's incarcerated. So we're seeing that overlap between child welfare and the criminal justice system. And then this statistic about children being 6 times more likely to become incarcerated themselves. This is actually from the National Institute of Justice article, and it's been around for a long time and widely used. However, the last few months, NIJ actually removed this citation because the original source wasn't able to be found. So rather than just delete it entirely, we actually wanted to draw your attention to it in case that was something you were knowledgeable of. We don't know what the rate actually might be if there is that connection because that original source was removed. But the good news is we have some strategies. We know that there is that intergenerational systems involvement and that we can serve families through that reentry process to try and disrupt that cycle. Next slide. So these next few slides are going to summarize how the incarceration of a parent can affect a child's well-being at different developmental stages in their life. So you might look at these slides and think, well, that's pretty typical child or adolescent behavior. And well, that's pretty true. These issues can definitely be exacerbated by the absence of a parent due to incarceration and the interruption of that parent-child relationship, especially if the parent is a strong support in that child's life. And we know from earlier that most mothers who are entering incarceration are the primary caregiver for their children. So you see on this slide here, it's talking about experiencing some behavioral problems, some mental health and delinquency, having some issues at school, right? Maybe some attention or aggression issues, some antisocial behaviors. Maybe that comes in the form of vandalism or theft, lying. Maybe some emotional difficulties that could look like struggling with emotional regulation. Next slide. Here we've got some descriptors for adolescents. So seeing that mental health and delinquency continue, but then substance use and misuse are starting to surface. We're seeing some continuation on mental health, so ADHD and conduct disorders, suicidal ideation and attempts, and then some of those educational barriers are starting to present. Educational attainment is starting to decreasing those odds of completing high school. Next slide. And then we have early adulthood. So again, continuing with mental health challenges and maybe some physical health problems start to present themselves. Early parenthood, so they start to become parents themselves, and that social isolation. And then more likely to become incarcerated themselves. Maybe they're having criminal justice involvement or encountering the system in that capacity. Next slide. So this slide here, start with the table on the right. This is AFCARS. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that, this is the Adoption and Foster Care Analysis Reporting System, the mouthful. So AFCARS is what we commonly refer to that as. And so these data are reported by all 50 states on this and many other data points, and they're submitted on an annual basis. So this specific data set is talking about the percentage of children with terminated parental rights, or TPR, which means that the child was removed from their parent's care and that the parent, for whatever reason, was not able to successfully reunify with their child. And so those parental rights were terminated. That's often referred to the equivalent of the death sentence to that parent-child relationship, because that's ultimately severed at that point where the parent and the child no longer have contact unless some sort of arrangement is made. But often, if it's in that capacity, they're not maintaining contact once TPR has been reached in this way. So this table breaks down the percent of children with a TPR by the condition of removal. So this isn't the reason they didn't reunify, but it's the reason they were removed in the first place. So what you'll see is that parental alcohol and drug use is the second most common reason listed in the table, with neglect being number one. But often what's happening is that substance use is hidden within that category, because child welfare workers either identify substance use as neglect. So they're seeing, lack of supervision due to a parent being under the influence, or maybe they forget to pick up little Johnny at school because they're under the influence, right? So it's captured in the category of neglect. Or substance use isn't identified until later on in the case, and so neglect is the category it's captured under. So that's kind of where we have that conversation there. And you'll also see that in the top 6 of these different conditions, the top is parental incarceration falling under those categories. So next, I want to draw your attention to that third bullet. This statement is pulled from a study from a women's correctional facility in Illinois. And the purpose of that project was to inform the development and implementation of gender-responsive policies and practices that were going to address the needs of incarcerated mothers and reduce the impact of incarceration on their children. So it's really tailored to the population we're talking about today. And what they ended up finding was that almost half of the mothers that were incarcerated had at least one child who had been involved within the child welfare system. So that overlap there. And the additional finding they had was that 43% of these mothers had spent time in foster care themselves. So not only are their children experiencing the child welfare system, but they themselves had experienced foster care. So this really points to that significant amount of overlap between the criminal justice and the child welfare systems. Next slide. Which leads us to our conversation around ACEs. So maybe some of you are familiar with ACEs and maybe some of you aren't. And so this is your new nugget of information today. So adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, these are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood, so ages 0 to 17 years. And you can see some examples of what those different experiences look like listed here on this slide. So there was a study that was done which led to a questionnaire being developed, which assesses the number of those experiences that someone has in their childhood. You might hear people reference an ACEs score. This is the tally of those different types of abuse, neglect, or other adverse experiences during childhood. And the higher ACEs score indicates higher risk of health or other adverse problems later on in life. So someone with a higher ACEs score may be more likely to engage in delinquent or criminal behavior. Remember that study I was just referring to on that previous slide? So almost half of those mothers had at least one child involved in the child welfare system, and 43% of them had time in foster care themselves. On average, those mothers responded yes to 6 of 10 items on the ACEs questionnaire, which would indicate a higher ACEs score. So we can see that correlation taking place between child welfare, criminal justice, and the ACEs scores. Next slide. So this goes on to continue the different elements of ACEs. So continuing into the environment that can undermine the sense of safety, stability, and bonding. So again, all the components we've hit on today: substance use, mental health, separation from a parent, or incarceration. This isn't the complete list. There's plenty of other traumatic experience that could impact health or well-being. Could be not having enough food to eat. It could be homelessness, experiencing discrimination. You can definitely learn more about that if you look up the ACEs study. So definitely ties into our topic today, but I do have good news, not always bad news over here. ACEs can be prevented and mitigated. And so by supporting that parent-child relationship, we can incorporate some of those strategies to really think about and create those positive childhood experiences as well. So, so there is good news on the other side of that. Next slide. All right, so children who experience foster care typically have at least one by entering foster care, but often more ACE score, and they may be more likely to engage in delinquent or criminal behaviors. You'll see on this slide other experiences that may have, so some conduct symptoms, mental health challenges, more risk factors, and more experiences they may have. But I really want to draw your attention to the box indicating about over 90% of foster youth who experience 5 or more placements may end up in the juvenile justice system. So I'm going to give you some additional context with this. So over a third of children or youth in foster care experience more than 2 placements each year, meaning their living arrangements change at least 3 times a year. And on average, a child in out-of-home care on average, a child is in out-of-home care for at least 1 to 2 years. So they have the potential to experience 6 changes within 2 years on average. Some experience more, some less. We're talking in averages, right? Well, that had me really curious in prepping for today's webinar. So I Googled it, right? As anybody would, pull out the Google. So the average person in their lifespan, so let's see, average life expectancy, right? 77.5 years. The average person moves 11.7 times in their lifetime. So if we take that average life expectancy based on the average number of times they move, that's once every 7 years. A child in foster care moves approximately 21 times more frequently than the average person. Just putting that into some context. So the question is, are you able to recognize when that multi-system involvement is taking place? When the person sitting in your office, the person involved in your program, what have you, have they been involved in foster care? Have they been involved in the child welfare system, juvenile justice, criminal justice? What does that look like, and how is that being taken into consideration? Clarence is going to talk to you more about that. Next slide. So parental incarceration, it's going to present children with some uncertainty, right? What's going on? Where am I going to live? When are my parents coming home? Is there going to be enough money? Who's making me dinner tonight? What's going to happen next, right? Each child's going to respond differently and uniquely, but parent-child separation could be one of the most seriously and potentially traumatic experiences a child could have. So as you can see on this slide, plenty of feelings that a child could have, either all at once or one right after the other. I was reviewing this source as we were prepping as well. And one thing that just really stood out to me, it highlights some quotes from kiddos who experience parental incarceration. And this one stood out under role confusion. And so this is from a kiddo named Jason. He's 16. And he says, when my mom would call home, I used to ask her, are you all right? Are they feeding you? Do you have a blanket at night? I was only 8, but I was acting like the mother. So it really puts it into context of the level of heaviness these kiddos feel when their parents are experiencing that separation and that incarceration piece. Next slide. And I want to leave you with this. So this is the Children of Incarcerated Parents Bill of Rights. I won't dive too deep into this slide, but ultimately this emphasizes the need for children to have safety, support, and the preservation of family relationships. I really encourage you to check out this resource. It really does a great job of advocating for children and just what they deserve when it comes to their parent being incarcerated and how to kind of flip the script, right? We heard all about ACEs and all these adverse childhood experiences. this is one of the strategies, things that we can think about in the context of those positive child experiences. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Clarence to start talking us through some of those barriers and other strategies.
Thanks, Ariel, for that great deep dive into the data. We can go on to the next slide, please. So as Ariel said, my name is Clarence James. I am also a program associate with the Center for Children and Family Futures. I will be celebrating my year with CFF next month, actually. And prior to joining CFF, I served as a program coordinator for the Adult and Family Treatment Court in Cass County, Michigan. As Ariel also stated, I'm very excited to be here with you all today. Next slide. So before we dive into the common barriers to reentry, I want to ask the question, what is successful reentry? And here you see we provided the answer. Helping people who experience incarceration succeed and positively contribute to their families and communities. I want to highlight positively contribute within the communities because that answer can mean various things depending on the person. This becomes more about looking at the needs and the assessment of the person in the community. Also, we should think of how families can be a support and how do we get families to manage expectations of the person re-entering the community. An example from when I was a program coordinator in Cass County is that we had a parent first come into the program. They said when they first entered the program, it was like getting into a canoe for the first time. And if anyone's been in a canoe for the first time, is how unstable it was. And they said it was unstable because of how can they manage the expectations of their family, their own expectations, or the expectations of the team. So throughout the progress and duration of their program, they learned how to lean into the support of their family and into the program, and notice that they didn't have to actually be in a canoe by themselves, but also the team and their family can be in a canoe with them to help balance it out and be on smooth waters. Next slide, please. So people re-entering the community have unique needs, and often these needs have not been addressed prior to the release or during the reentry process. These barriers can hinder treatment and the ability to overcome criminogenic needs. They include, but are not limited to, difficulty obtaining employment and safe and stable housing. I want us to think about how overwhelming it is, even for us, filling out job applications and housing applications. But just think about also the including not knowing that you will have to disclose your criminal history and also the stigma associated with having a criminal record. So as family members and community support, how do we prepare people for applying for jobs and housing and the possible disappointment of not receiving a call back or being approved? Lack of education. There are various types of barriers involving a lack of education. Some people not having the proper education level or receiving the proper educational services, especially for those who may have undiagnosed learning disabilities. Substance use disorder and mental health. Difficulty transitioning largely due to the substance and mental health needs. These difficulties are often seen as missed supervision, community supervision, or positive drug screens. So again, as my time as a coordinator, a lot of times that these missed appointments in the community were due to the lack of transportation needs. So it goes greater beyond just the barriers as we see on here, but the underlying barriers of what services or what supports do these people coming out into the community have from being incarcerated. Next slide, please. Now we're going to shift gears to system level strategies, meaning that we're going to going above individual strategies. Establishing a community coalition. Once mothers are back into the community, it takes the attention and collaborative partnerships between treatment providers, recovery support organizations, correctional facilities, criminal justice personnel, and other community partners to determine the reentry needs, the gaps of services, and the reentry program components. Now, meaning simply put, that no person or agency can do this work alone. So having a collaborative partnerships can create sustainable infrastructure. Program sustainability is critical in both reentry and behavioral health contexts, as continuity of mental health and substance use services is key for successful reentry from jail or prison to the community. Now, again, I want to highlight the word sustainability because that too can mean various things, such as continued funding, staffing, community partnerships, and other resources. So programs need to create systems that support the ongoing data collection for program monitoring and evaluation. To put it simple, we can't manage what we don't measure. We need information about how people are doing. And as my time as a coordinator, we often hear programs, even our programs say, mothers aged 18 to 24 did not do well in the program. And I had to think to myself and ask our team, is it that they didn't do well? Or did we need to look from a different lens and say that the program did not do a good job of serving this population and figure out why? Disaggregating your program's data, not only looking at how well the program is, but how is the program looking at other characteristics of the community because equity explicit looks different from community to community. Have to ask the questions, is the program working for everyone? And not just one particular demographic. Next slide, please. There are various key considerations for people with substance use and mental health disorders. The first one we want to tap into is beginning the reentry process as early as possible. This means gathering general information from these women who coming into incarcerated jails or prison, asking, are they mothers? Do they have any children? What does their support look like? What is their level of education? Do they have any trades or any hobbies, any skills? Now, granted, the length of the sentence may play a role, especially regarding housing and employment, when asking this general information. But appropriate support during the reentry into the community can reduce the risk for recurrence of symptoms, as well as the risk of overdose, death by suicide, or the risk for reincarceration. There was a study done in the state of North Carolina that found during 2016 through 2018, the risk of death from overdose among formerly incarcerated people was 20 times higher than that for the general population at 1 year post-release. The relative risk was even higher at 50 times during 2 weeks after release. Reading the study, and every time I read these numbers or even think of these numbers, it's just staggering how high they are. Meaning that's why we got to prioritize building rapport. We need to ask ourselves, or do you have the opportunity to meet with these mothers prior to their release? If not, we may look into conducting a strategy that we can go into these facilities to facilitate a continuity of care prior to their release. We need to provide needed supplies immediately. It's important for people re-entering the community that they have what they need to support their physical and mental health immediately upon leaving the facility. A prime example of this is for people who are on medications for a physical or mental health condition, that they should receive the same medications that they're on while in custody, as well as into the community. And also having the bridging prescription for at least 30 days so they can have the supply and medication that they need, that provide a warm handoff to the community behavioral health services and set up those medical appointments so they can get the continued care that they need. Next slide, please. At post-release, recovery support services, including housing, employment, medical care for chronic health conditions, peer support, and family reunification are critical to successful reentry. Jane will be talking about this and engaging families and some of the strategies coming here shortly. Again, a warm handoff should be provided to these services for the coordination of care. That will reduce immediate risk for individuals living with substance use disorders and mental health disorders. By correctional and community providers can mitigate risk for those re-entering the community by making sure they have needed medications that we talked about before and resources to help fill any gaps in treatment. As we talked about that North Carolina study, men and women have an increased risk of rearrest or reincarceration within the first year of that post-release. So it's imperative that we provide ongoing support for the person during reincarceration. Next slide, please. SAMHSA has described 4 major dimensions that support a life in recovery. The first one being health. This emphasizes the importance of managing disease symptoms and making informed and healthy choices that support physical and emotional well-being. I want to go into this and break it up into subcategories. Physical health, encouraging regular medical checkups, healthy exercise, and a balanced diet to maintain that physical health. Mental health, providing access to mental health services, therapy, and medication management to support our mental well-being. Substance use management, programs and strategies to reduce or eliminate substance use, including support groups and counseling. This can be where the recovery community comes into play, the 12-step community. So let's consider a participant who has other underlying health issues. Engaging and including family members in the treatment plan can be a source of tremendous support for the individual. The family can help the individual adhere to medications, attend services, and ultimately just provide a nurturing environment to help increase the chances of success. Home, focus on having a stable and safe place to live. This is a foundation element for recovery because people can focus on recovery when they know that they have a safe place for them and their family to lay their head at night. Safety and stability, ensuring that people living in an environment is free from threats and conducive to recovery. So if we can eliminate some of these barriers, then the primary focus can be on recovery and allow that to be easily recognizable and accessible. Supportive housing. What programs that provide affordable and supportive housing options for individuals in recovery? Like we talked about in that very first slide, how overwhelming it is that can bring on stress, underlining general anxiety, depression, of having to face the stigma associated with reporting my criminal record. So, what services are helpful to these people coming re-enter into the community, especially mothers who are the primary caregivers, as Ari already mentioned in the data section? We're going to talk about purpose. This involves having meaningful daily activities such as a job, school, hobbies, creative endeavors which provide a sense of purpose and contribute to one's self-worth. Again, tapping back into my coordinator experience, I always used to ask our mothers, what are some of your goals? What are some of your hobbies? What do you like to do for fun? Because oftentimes they can be able to tell me what their children like to do, what their friends like to do, or what their other family members like to do, but they often put their needs and their interests on the back burner because they are so focused on what are my children needs and what do I need to do to take care of them. So again, encouraging them to say, hey, what are your hobbies? What are some of your goals? Employment education. Do we provide access to job training, education, and employment opportunities? Volunteering and hobbies. Encourage engagement in the community service and personal interests, as we talked about before. Goal setting, helping individuals set and achieve personal goals that foster a sense of achievement and purpose. One thing that I always used to promote is that when you have one goal, sets 3 sub goals, so it seems like you're meeting that one goal. So if you see that you are meeting the steps of the goal, that will take care of the main goal in itself, and that seemed to be a beneficial and fruitful way to goal setting when I was a coordinator. Community, the importance of having relationships and social networks that provide support, friendship, love, and hope. Family is very important, as we're going to talk about again, is when Jane is going to talk about some of these strategies involving family and engaging the family and also family case planning. How do we build support networks? Building strong support networks through family, friends, and peer support groups, involving the community, encouraging the participation in community activities and groups to foster a sense of belonging. Stigma reduction, efforts to reduce stigma and discrimination against individuals in recovery and promoting inclusion and acceptance. Discuss peer groups and community organizations and how they provide supportive environment for recovery. When I was a coordinator, again, peer supports was my greatest asset and ally for our programs with that lived experience to tap into people re-entering the community, especially those mothers. Having the community and say, hey, you're not alone in this. So we need to engage families, whoever that individual is and whoever they identify, because I like to say it's two families that we have: one family that we're born into and one that we acquire over time. And through the support and peer supports become like family to a lot of our mothers and other parents that enter these programs from incarceration. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jane so she can talk about strategies to actively integrate family members' input and perspective.
Great. Thanks so much, Clarence. I really appreciate it. And yes, there are several points that I'm going to make as well that relate back to what you've said. So thanks so much. And thanks, Ariel. I'm Jane Pfeiffer. I'm a program director here at the Center for Children and Family Futures. And I have been with our organization for 13 years. And the focus of these next several slides for the remainder until we get to the question and answer is really about how to actively integrate family members' input and perspective. And I want to start by talking about language. You'll hear me say later too about how language matters, because it really does. And first off, when you hear the phrase, which we hear often these days, to include family voice, it is it's something I think that it's language that's being used more and more, but we want to be intentional with this language, which is why we changed it a bit. And I'm going to suggest that the term family voice can be in some instances sort of one-dimensional, whereas by itself particularly, but what we really want is active and ongoing inclusion and integration of family members' input and perspective, which should be ongoing. It should be more than really comes across as sort of three-dimensional, if you will, and so much more dynamic and much more inclusive. And then also I want to focus on the term family member and just follow up to what Clarence just said about how we want to think about family broadly defined throughout this webinar, but certainly as we talk about these strategies. And we want to think about it as self-defined by the person who has experienced incarceration. There can sometimes be legal limitations in who and how we include non-blood relatives in our work. But to the extent we can define family as the mother, as the person themselves define family, we should. So we've drawn on these following slides, we've drawn from transferable strategies from a variety of sources spanning the fields of corrections and criminal justice, juvenile justice, and child welfare. This won't be anything I think that will surprise any of you, but many mothers who've experienced incarceration have family members or are themselves also involved in multiple systems, sometimes sequentially, sometimes all at once. But it really requires coordinated cross-systems collaboration and an approach that where we're not all doing it alone. And then lastly, before I move on to some of the content, I want to say that as we go through these strategies, my guess is that depending on what your role is in the job that you do, you're going to see some of these things and think, you're already doing these. And maybe they even seem like common sense. Isn't everybody doing these? But I hope and imagine that there will be strategies that you aren't currently using, or maybe even that you haven't considered. My hope is that you can take away at least a few strategies in a way that you can strengthen what you're already doing, or perhaps begin implementing something new. You may also see what you consider a good idea, but to make that level or that kind of change really requires something above your pay grade, really requires somebody else to make a policy change or a policy decision, not really within your ability to implement. So I encourage you in those cases to think about some next steps. I encourage you to talk to your supervisor, maybe explore it in some way. Share it with your peers and partners, what you've learned, and discuss what's possible. So the slide that you see here has to do with the why. And I have to admit, 20 years ago, when I was a line staff probation officer here in Northern California, I didn't really fully appreciate, or if I'm honest, really go out of my way to include family member input any more than was minimally required. And back then, no one was really pushing for more than some basic family involvement, particularly because I was in a unit, we were supervising adults. And I see now that that was really a missed opportunity. So let's start with the why. Let's talk about these benefits. Why go to what's often extra and sometimes frustrating effort to include family members' perspective? And it's because it makes a difference. And these are some ways in which it can make a difference. Starting from the philosophy that families are the experts in determining what's best for themselves. And what that means, just like you and me, they get to make bad decisions for themselves as well, or decisions that we perhaps wouldn't make. But in many cases, in the process of living one's life, you're making the best decision for yourself at the time, and hopefully, with in these cases, hopefully mothers who are transitioning from custody back into the community with some really strong support and services. So you heard Clarence mention this, and I'll say it again. Mothers in particular are often in a caretaker's role and therefore don't necessarily have the same level of familial and community support coming out of custody as others. It's a pretty broad statement, and it certainly doesn't apply to everyone or everyone in the same way. But we often see that with mothers because they sometimes put others first. So it's important to consider all the ways to include family in the transition process and to see all the ways that it's beneficial. A couple of comments here about the particular items on the slide. So family preservation. So involving family members early in the case, early in the work that you're doing to help in the ways that potentially can preserve, to allow children, when a mother's going into custody, if the child can live safely with a relative. When we think about improved interpersonal relationships, I'll talk about relationships for the mother and those in her life in a few slides here, but this really is referring to the relationship between the mother in this case, who's experienced incarceration, and the community supervision officer or other kind of case manager. You're going to hear me use the word case manager as in a generic way, because that could be a caseworker or a case manager from a community-based organization, or it could be probation or parole, or any number of other roles. But a family's belief that all of its members are respected, that its strengths and challenges, concerns, and cultural differences are recognized and accepted, really strengthens the relationship, and particularly strengthens the relationship with that, what I'm calling a case manager. So it creates confidence in the process and increases chances for successful engagement and intervention. Increased buy-in. So a couple of my favorite sayings that I guess I can't really cite who said them. But one of them is, case planning shouldn't happen to the person, it should happen with the person. So the idea is that it's not, that there is some involvement of the mother in the development of that case plan. And a common quote I think you hear is, "Nothing about us without us." And while used in a completely different context, I would say how it applies here really is that family members often have input that can be helpful in the overall success of that mother and her family. So people and their family members are more likely to commit. And again, when I say people, I don't even mean individuals who are on community supervision or transitioning out of. It's true, but it's true for all of us. When we're more likely to commit to achieving goals, when we're able to help make the decisions about a plan that will affect us. And so really thinking about all the ways that can happen. And then creating a sense of belonging and family connectedness, and better support for families, the inclusion of extended family members in case planning, and thinking about if children are going to be reunified or going to be living with a mother as she transitions it back into the community, all of the steps and requirements that may involve. And then again, I've said it already once, and I'll say it a few more times. Some people who may play the most important role in mothers and her children's lives and other family members are those who may not be legally or technically related, but who have an emotionally significant relationship with the child, with a family or the child and the mother. I'm sure you can think of other benefits. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about engagement now. And I want to read a quote from SAMHSA, from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So according to SAMHSA, a system of care is an organizational philosophy and framework that involves collaboration across agencies, families, and youth for the purpose of improving access and expanding the array of coordinated community-based, culturally and linguistic competent services and supports for children, youth, and their families. And so we think about this in that context, that a system of care is that overarching and comprehensive way to meet the needs of mothers, of other parents, of children, and other family members. So this type of coordinated, collaborative effort by multiple partners can help mothers with their very real needs as they plan for and are released from custody. So let's talk in a little more specifics. So family-centered practice, it's what we do here at CCFF all day, every day. We have a lot of available resources. We'd be happy to follow up and provide more information about really any of these concepts. But it requires, family-centered practice requires a commitment to family-centered practice and particularly the underlying philosophy and values. So providing a comprehensive array of clinical treatment, but not just clinical treatment. So not just, let's say, substance use disorder or mental health treatment, but also related support services that meet the individualized needs of each family members, not just the person in front of you, not just the mother who is transitioning back into the community. So the good news is it's not all on one agency or organization. There are partners, there are organizations in the community that's doing this work. Undoubtedly, you have a group of partners that work together to meet the needs of families, and we can only do more of this. So who else can provide services for the families? Are there committees or networks where family serving agencies come together? Are you involved? Could you be? What would that look like? And then contact. So use the importance of using sufficient frequency and length of contact with family members and their support networks. This is a strategy that I have to say pretty much undeniably takes more time. Many of these strategies don't take more time. It's the work smarter, not harder kind of thing. It's something that you can incorporate into your existing work without much additional or any additional time. This one, though, I think really does because you are, by definition, talking to more people. You're engaged in a way. And so again, maybe it's not you, maybe it's someone else, another partner. I also want to make a point about confidentiality. We'll talk about it here on the next slide, but before that, I want to just say that contact with family members really has to, of course, be within the bounds of confidentiality laws and releases of information. Critical that the mother who has experienced incarceration understands what information is going to be shared and for what purpose. We'd like to think that all family members are supportive of their family member who's being released, but that support doesn't always look the same, and they may have different thoughts or agendas or values in a way that makes some family members not as supportive as we might hope. Sometimes that can happen in time, it can improve in time, and sometimes not. But so really working to be sure that that contact is appropriate and just right-sized. And then communication. So related to contact, it's key to set a foundation for building trust by communicating clearly, honestly, and respectfully with families. Kind of goes without saying, I know. But over the years prior to working with CCFF, I did a lot of training with probation officers, police officers, parole, and other law enforcement. And at that time, and albeit it's been a few years, but that time there was certainly not there was some concern that in order to be in order to be perhaps fully honest, or maybe fully respectful in a way that was being asked, that it somehow went against their need for command presence. And that's a topic for another time, but I'm here to say that it really doesn't. And I think today we all know that it doesn't. But clarity, honesty, and respect is expected and hoped for all, interaction with all families. Concrete services. So I don't know, this perhaps should have been first on the list. Nothing else gets done that basic needs aren't met. Substance use disorder treatment, of course, it's a need for many of the mothers who are being released from custody. Maybe they've received treatment in custody, maybe not. Maybe they're transitioning into a lower level of care. But if I don't have safe and stable housing, and you heard this before earlier today, if I don't have safe and stable housing for me and eventually for my children when they're back in my custody, I really can't be expected to focus on, maybe I'll attend, maybe not. But even if I do attend, how can I possibly focus on what is expected of me to get from this SUD treatment, for instance? Mothers need help to access concrete services really that meet their needs, the needs of their families, and those immediate needs like food, housing, transportation, and often childcare. Individualized service plans, critical to create these plans. You've heard a bit about this, so I won't go into too much detail, but as you've heard us say already, this will look different based on available resources and services and supports in each community. And then the strengths-based approach. This too probably should be first on the list. It's really key. The importance of recognizing and reinforcing the capabilities of mothers who've experienced incarceration and their family members, not just their needs and problems, because really it's true of all of us. By using our strengths, we overcome our barriers, and I just can't emphasize that enough. Couple of suggestions for change that can happen when the webinar's over. If you're responsible for interviewing mothers who are transitioning to the community, is there a question on the form about what she identifies as her strengths? Probably not. Maybe, but probably not. Is there room? Can you add it? Can you ask it informally? And then another suggestion would be, can you review your list of partners and see if there are any gaps, any partnerships that could be made, perhaps that aren't currently. Next slide, please. More on engagement. Shared decision-making and participatory planning, a common theme throughout this whole webinar. And I want to recognize at the front end that some decisions can't be made solely by the person who's experienced incarceration because of the nature of the decision that has to be made. But many can be mutually agreed upon. And case planning, including goals and the plans, really can reflect both what I'm calling the case manager, but can include the case manager's professional training and also acknowledge the family's knowledge of their own situation. And where there are opportunities for shared decision-making, we should be taking advantage of it. So again, you might be doing a great job at this. Are there still areas for improvement? Broad-based involvement. Helping the parent, in this case, the mother, create a web of support that includes, when appropriate, the other parent, extended family members, informal networks, community representatives, really that support safety and provide links to needed services. And then foster and adoptive parent resources. Many cases, the mother who's being released from custody will not immediately have custody of her children. Although it's the goal, there may or may not be an open child welfare case, but either way, recognizing that foster parents or family caregivers, depending on the situation, even adoptive parents, if reunification isn't the goal or if that's not the direction, can be in many cases resources not only for the children in their care, but also for the mother as she's transitioning back home. There are a lot of, and again, each scenario, what type of custody the transition's happening from, whether there's a child welfare case, lots of factors, but to the extent that resource families, what we traditionally have called foster families, and even adoptive parents, in some instances, really can be a resource for the mother and can help to improve the relationship. Parent praise and recognition. So positive reinforcement goes a long way toward positive behavior change. I don't know, there's something like 60 or 70 years of behavior change research demonstrating that. It's more effective than punishment. It's more effective than negative reinforcement. So I just say, find reasons to praise and recognize mothers who are making life changes or steps toward life changes, resulting in safe and permanent living situations for themselves and their children. And confidentiality, again, really understanding the role of confidentiality in each situation and how to involve partners in case planning by having appropriate, intentional releases of information in a way that's respectful of the family and enables those partners to create realistic plans because they have enough of the information of what the other partners are requiring or other service providers. Quick example of something to do when the webinar is over. Is there room in your work for more shared decision making? Can you make room? Is praise and recognition a regular part of your practice? If it isn't, could it be? If so, are there ways to strengthen it? Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk more specifically about reentry case planning. Although this particular information memorandum, or IM, was written for the child welfare system and dependency courts, I think as you see these concepts, I think you'll agree that the strategies are certainly transferable. And I'm going to go through them relatively quickly, but making it a priority. So a quote from this particular IM: it's critical for all agencies, organizations, and providers that work with families and youth across the public and private sectors to explicitly commit to listening to parents and youth and acting on the knowledge and information parents and youth with lived experience offer. Today more than ever, the involvement of persons with lived experience is involved in the work that we're doing, and it's been a long time coming because we know that someone who's lived through this is often has a perspective that others don't. Co-creating a clear vision, so working directly with parents, with youth and caregivers to create the vision about how the work should be done. And that's both at the case level and at the systems level. So what input can we incorporate from individuals that have lived experience? Peer-led and supported services. So again, this is sort of another facet of this, and you heard it earlier as well. People who have previously received services and support similar to what current mothers in this case are receiving can be a really powerful resource for mothers and families currently going through the process. And so really thinking about, what does that peer support look like? Where can we include peers? Where are there peer programs in the community that we can partner with? I said I'd come back to language matters, and this really is it. It's a reminder that we really need to acknowledge and be mindful of the words that we use, that when we're describing mothers, parents, and youth and caregivers, that the words we use carry connotations and can either support or disempower mothers, other parents, and their children. So using terms like family instead of case, things that seem simple, parent instead of birth parent. And certainly sometimes we need to distinguish between types of parents, but really being thoughtful about the words we use is important. And then feedback loops for continuous quality improvement. So changing large systems is hard. And the ability to measure change and create a system of accountability is really key. So any CQI, continuous quality improvement, any CQI system needs feedback loops. So information coming in, for instance, from people with lived experience, people who have been through the process, and then also information going out. So a feedback loop meaning all the way around, right? So the information's coming in, but then there's also information going out about how that how that information was used. Quick question, quick example or recommendation for what can be done after the webinar, and that is make a list of what objective practices you follow that demonstrate that engaging families in case planning is a priority, and make another list of ways to enhance or add to those practices. Next slide, please. So these and the strategies on the next two slides come from a publication supported by the National Institute of Corrections and BJA, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, in collaboration with the Urban Institute and Community Works West. They developed a set of model practices to facilitate parent-child communication and contact during parental incarceration, so specifically in the facility. It focuses on strategies to support parent-child connection while the parent's incarcerated. These principles and practices really apply, many of them apply to the transition period and into the community. I think you'll agree, if some of you are probably very familiar with this resource, it's there's so much more than I have time to share with you in the next few minutes, but I do want to go over a couple of key takeaways from this important resource. So about partnership building, I talked about collaboration, and it's more than just people sitting around a desk or sitting around a table, although that's the first step. But we really want to think about, and this particular research talks about identifying potential partners, determining the scope and nature of the partnerships, and then implementing collaborative partnerships. So it's the implementing of that partnership and what that means. So once you identify the partners to meet the needs of the mothers and their families, then you can determine whether it's an informal or formal partnership and what those next steps are. Training. This strategy focuses on core competencies, that there need to be a list of core competencies expected of, in the resource talks about facility staff, but really any staff that interact often with parents and their families. So maybe they work in the visiting room, maybe they conduct security searches on visitors, maybe they're answering the phones, maybe they're at the front desk of a community-based organization, for instance. But so there are a list of competencies highlighted that really are necessary and prerequisites, if you will, for implementing parent-focused programming and interacting with children as well as caregivers and other family members. So lots of rich examples and I encourage you to take a look at this, a closer look at this resource. Intake and assessment. We're talking here primarily about needs assessment. So to identify and make recommendations about mothers' parental and familial needs. So for example, mothers who have lived with their children or were a primary source of emotional support before incarceration may simply need to participate in family contact visits or other family-centered services. But there are also mothers who have a strained or non-existent relationship with their child, and that may take, they may benefit from other types of services such as coached phone calls or parenting classes, other kinds of therapeutic help. Family notification is about notifying families of the mother's status, so creating or updating the facility website, for instance. Next slide, please. Okay, lots of information, I know, and it's a little like drinking from a fire hose. But the items on this slide, and then the last slide, which is next, but the items on this slide, I just want to talk about, again, these are some more logistics kinds of things that can be done or strategies, but thinking what classes or groups, or I would say services and interventions that are available to mothers. So again, the resource is talking about in the facility, but using this more broadly to think about what's available, and if it isn't available in the community, how can it be developed? But parenting classes to expand understanding of child development. What are realistic expectations of a 2-year-old compared to a 5-year-old, for instance? Parenting support groups, relationship classes, and not just, I mean, we think about relationship classes, we think about romantic, and there's lots of room for classes to support mothers and fathers as well, men and women, but also thinking about the range of relationships, co-parenting relationships, parental relationships, and then considering restorative justice classes and circles. So consider whether the curriculum is evidence-based, whether it's appropriate for the persons being served, and really thinking about some of those other logistics kinds of even more logistic related, like visitors' lobbies and visiting, creating a welcoming environment, making visitor lobbies child and family friendly. And this really applies to all waiting rooms, for instance, in the community or in the facility. reviewing guidelines and procedures, making physical changes to the visiting space. It can be as easy as paint, changing the paint color and so forth. And then parent-child communication, offering parents free or subsidized phone calls with their children, providing parents with opportunities to communicate with people and systems that affect their children, and there are many more. Next slide, please. So caregiver support, we referenced this earlier as well, but really involving caregivers in the programming in the facility where that's possible, so that they can work together as the release happens, providing free or low-cost transportation to and from the facility. And I know that seems insurmountable, but there are sites out there undoubtedly that are doing that. Have found a way, perhaps through partnerships, to make that happen. Partnering with a community-based provider to offer childcare, and then family-focused reentry. And the point I want to make here is about allowing parents experiencing incarceration to begin reentry planning well before the release date. I don't know if there are any substance use disorder or mental health treatment folks attending the webinar right now, but very similar to discharge planning. Discharge planning happens day one of the treatment episode. So same thing. We really want to think about that reentry planning early in the process. Considering community mapping as something you can do once this webinar is over. Consider community mapping to identify agencies and organizations and other resources that would strengthen your work, and review your current practices and discuss whether and to what extent they're family-centered. Then develop a plan to strengthen those practices. And with that, I will turn it over to Felicia.
Thank you so much to CCFF for such a comprehensive presentation today, all the way from statistics to mothers and that are experiencing incarceration, to the reentry process and what that looks like and what successful reentry is, to actionable strategies. So really lovely. I learned so much. So now it's time for Q&A. We did receive some questions in the chat, but please, if you have any burning questions, now's your time. Of course, if any questions come up after, you'll see my email address where you can reach out to me. But I wanted to just read off some of the questions that came in. The first one is from Dominique. Is there any research or data regarding youth who are incarcerated but are also parents, and the importance of their family's continued engagement as well as their continued engagement with their child? So I think we will probably follow up with you with some of that. That's a very specific data set there. So I'm sure CCFF will look into it and get back to you, but not sure, Ariel, if you had anything else to add to that question at this time.
Yeah, we not off the top of our heads with any specific research or data, but we do a lot of work in this area, and so we can definitely take some time to look into that for you and follow up and provide that to CSG and then follow up after the webinar. So great question though. Thinking about that multi-generational involvement, it's on several levels, so it's a really great question.
Yes, that is a good one. I had my wheels turning too. Great, thank you. And so just another reminder that we are recording the webinar today, and we will post it on our website along with the actual PDF PowerPoint, so you can click on any links and check out any of the citations and other resources listed. And as we're going through the Q&A, the slides will continue to advance, and you'll see some of those resources that were on the earlier slides that we couldn't fit on the slides. We just added them towards the end. So we have another question from Brittany. It's a 3-part question asking about the scope of the services at CCFF, and if you're working in Georgia with moms in reentry and also or incarcerated mothers, and any of your availability to partner. So Ariel, I'll defer to you for answering that one.
Sure. And Jane, I saw you unmute. Did you want to respond to that?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yep, I'm happy to. So as I think Felicia mentioned at the top, we operate a number of technical assistance centers for mostly federal agencies, and depending on what the request is, we very likely could either provide some support, some additional information. But so we're providing technical assistance at the intersection, not always of child welfare, but child welfare, substance use disorder, mental health and trauma. And so, and then we also provide technical assistance to family treatment courts and their partners. And so there's a lot of, and those are just a couple of examples. There's a lot of work that we do that potentially, depending on what your need is or request, we would be happy to figure out what might be possible. So long way of saying, please contact us. And that can be through CSG, Felicia, if you'd prefer, or we can, however you'd like to.
Sure, Brittany, however you'd like. You'll see my email at the end of this. It's pretty simple. It's fwright@csg.org. You can check out the website for CCFF as well. But yeah, you can reach out to me if that works, if that's easiest.
Yeah, and if it, Felicia, would you rather I add my email address or not?
If you want to say it out loud, just because we don't have the chat, we don't have the
that's
chat.
Right.
So
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you wanted to say it, but yeah,
it's not as easy as yours, Felicia. It's J and then my last name PFEIFER. So JPFEIFER at cffutures.org. CFFUTURES.org. And then I can direct it in, depending on what your request is, I can send it in the right direction.
Thank you so much. There was a question that we answered, like we just typed the answer in the Q&A, but we actually wanted to just talk about it out loud because it was a great question about the data on slide 16. And it was asking, that was the data about AFCARs and the condition for removal for children. And it asked, was each case only allowed to have one condition? And was curious if anyone, Ariel or Jane, if you wanted to discuss the process for that, of how, the decision-making process for the caseworkers or child welfare workers, and how that data is actually entered. It's interesting.
Sure. So yeah. So if it's possible, can we jump back to slide 16, if that's not too much? And while he's doing that, so you'll see the multiple, one more, there we go, perfect, thank you. So of all of these different conditions, so you can pick more than one when you're selecting the reasons for removal. So when our research and evaluation team runs this analysis, they capture all of the ones that say yes. So if we totaled all those percentages, it's going to be more than 100%. So it's not unduplicated data. There could be children represented in the neglect category that are also captured under, parental incarceration or parental alcohol or drug use. And so, and Jane or Clarence, feel free to add in with this, but a lot of what we hear from child welfare workers is often it's a training issue when it comes to AFCARs, is that when they're looking at their data systems in SACWIS, and I can't tell you what that acronym stands for, but we can follow up on that, in their reporting system, sometimes it's a drop down, or just the way they see it, it appears as though they can only select one, but they've got to click a couple times, and they just weren't trained that way. So it's a training issue in that capacity. Sometimes, kind of like when I talked through this slide, substance use isn't identified until later on in the case, and so they don't know that they can go back and identify that later on. So it's kind of multifaceted in different ways. There's another slide we often present on about parental substance use across the United States. And one of our colleagues will share, California and Oregon and the difference. And it's like, oh, you cross state lines, and the percent differences is quite stagnant. And it's like, oh, you cross state lines and you no longer have a substance use disorder. And that's obviously not the case, but it's more along the lines of just how they're reporting that information. So it's really getting into the nitty gritty around that. But I don't know, Jane or Clarence, did you want to add any more?
I'll just add briefly, SACWIS is statewide automated child welfare information system. And regarding the AFCARS data, so This data, as you can imagine, is collected at the county level or at the district level. Child welfare agencies are then and then reporting it to the state, who then reports it to the feds, to the federal government. And so often, in my experience, county level data can be much richer. There can be perhaps 2 or 3 or more of those on the list selected, and they report them to the state. And some states decide just to report the top one, the first one. And so if you're interested, it could be a question for your child welfare folks, because it could be that there's more when you look at it from state to state. For instance, there could be more information, richer information at the county level that just decisions are made not to necessarily send it on. So it does differ from state to state. And as Ariel said, it has to do sometimes with training, sometimes with the limitations of the automated system itself. I mean, there are a number of factors. Yeah.
Thank you. I could hear about that all day. It's just very fascinating. I don't have any other open questions on the Q&A. I'll give it one more minute in case anyone does have a last question that they want to ask before we wrap up. But if we can just get to the slides towards the end of the webinar, and thank you. So here we have all of the detailed citations for all the slides that where we couldn't fit all of this. So just know that when you see these PowerPoints on our website, you'll be actually able to access all of this really important and fascinating information and data to help guide the work. Thank you again to CCFF for the amazing presentation today and really bringing this topic to the forefront on this platform field-wide to folks. Thank you for everyone for engaging with us and for your really introspective questions. Again, the last slide I think has my email address on there. It was also chatted out to everyone and also along with Jane. So if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to connect you to the source or to the answer that you're looking for. And again, this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted in about 1 to 2 weeks, along with the PowerPoint. And please for our newsletter at csgjusticecenter.org, where you can get news blasts about upcoming webinars, other resources. Some, I could preview that some might be coming out in partnership with CCFF maybe, but you won't know unless you sign up for the webinar, for the newsletter. So just stay tuned to the work that we're doing in this arena. And thank you again to everyone for attending. Have a good one.